Yesterday, the Obama administration issued a new directive stating that the traditional work requirements of the new welfare reform law back in 1996, the new work requirements can be waived or overridden by a legal device called a waiver authority under the Social Security law. Welfare reform has been gutted, ladies and gentlemen.
And now, from sunny South Florida, it's Open Line Friday.
That's right. While everybody's worried about who the vice presidential nominee is going to be and whether or not the nominee is pro-life, pro-choice, pro-Martian, everybody's worried about whether Mitt Romney left Bain Capital in 1999 or 1998 or 2001. Barack Obama continues his systematic dismantling of the private sector economy of the United States of America. After this move, if anybody thinks that the attack on the way this country was founded is simply accidental, you can't. Great to have you here. Telephone number 800-282-2882. The email address lrushbaugh@eibnet.com. This is from the Heritage Foundation, Robert Rector, who has been at Heritage probably longer than Obama's been alive. Bob Rector. He's done some of the best work on poverty in this country as compared to poverty around the world. If you've become a Heritage member, you need to search and absorb some of the work of Bob Rector, R-E-C-T-O-R. Kiki Bradley also helped put together this report, Obama Guts Welfare Reform, from yesterday. The Obama Department of Health and Human Services released an official policy directive rewriting the Welfare Reform Law of 1996. The Welfare Reform Law of 1996 was put together in Congress, where all laws are put together. Bill Clinton vetoed it 2 or 3 times. Finally, he signed it as part of his need to get reelected in 1996. And when he signed it, finally, a bunch of Democrats, led by the Reverend Jackson, demanded that he change it after the election. But he didn't. It was left intact. It has been working. It requires work or an attempt to work in order to qualify for welfare payments. The new policy, however, guts the federal work requirements that were the foundation of welfare reform law. The Obama directive bludgeons the letter and intent of the actual legislation. Welfare reform replaced the old AFDC, Aid to Families with Dependent Children. That was the program where a mother got paid for every child she had, whether the husband was around or not. 99 times out of 100, the husband wasn't around. The federal government became the husband and the provider. And it became profitable to have babies, and it was a program out of control. Welfare reform fixed it, and AFDC became welfare reform. The actual name of the welfare reform law is Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, TANF. TANF is the acronym. Welfare reform, officially known as Temporary Assistance for Needy Families. The underlying concept of welfare reform was that able-bodied adults should be required to work or prepare for work as a condition of receiving welfare aid. The welfare reform law is often characterized as simply giving state governments more flexibility in operating welfare programs, and that's a misunderstanding. While new law did grant states more flexibility in some respects, the core of the act was the creation of rigorous, new federal work standards that state governments were required to implement. The welfare reform law was very successful. In the 4 decades prior to welfare reform, the welfare caseload never experienced a significant decline. But in the 4 years after welfare reform, starting in 1996, The caseload dropped by nearly half. It worked. Half of people on welfare, AFTC, which then became TANF, dropped out of the program. Employment surged. You had to find work to stay on welfare. You had to try to find work to stay on welfare. You had to work, and it worked. Employment surged. Child poverty, Rector's special area of expertise. Child poverty among affected groups plummeted. And the driving force behind these improvements was the rigorous new federal work requirements contained in welfare reform. Half of the welfare caseload dropped in 4 years. It worked. Obama can't abide that. We don't want people off of welfare in this regime. We don't want people leaving the welfare rolls. Those are voters that are getting away. We want more people in the welfare rolls. We're going to advertise food stamp. We're going to have food stamp parties. And I'm going to do all this while asking everybody to worry about what Mitt Romney's doing with his money. So how did Obama do this? You say, what was the trick? The regime yesterday issued a new directive stating that the traditional welfare reform work requirements can be waived or overwritten by a legal device called the Section 1115 Waiver Authority under the Social Security Law. Section 1115 says that the Secretary of Health and Human Services may waive compliance with any of the requirements of specified parts of the law. However, this is not an open-ended authority. Any provision of law that can be waived under Section 1115 must be listed in Section 1115. The work provisions of welfare reform are contained in Section 407. On purpose, critically, this section, as well as most other welfare reform requirements, are deliberately not listed in Section 1115 so that they would not be waivable. I hope this is not too hard to follow. We start throwing numbers out. People get confused. Basically, the people that wrote the law suspected that future administrations might try to play tricks and waive the work requirements. So they said the only thing that can be waived is in this section. Well, they did not put the work requirement in that section. So the law says that the work requirements cannot be waived. Yet Obama did it yesterday. That's right. In establishing welfare reform, Congress deliberately exempted or shielded nearly all of the welfare reform law from that Section 1115 waiver authority. They didn't want the law to be rewritten at the whim of Health and Human Services bureaucrats. They knew that there'd be people come along the road later down the line that would want to do it. Of the roughly 35 sections of the welfare reform law, only one is listed as waivable at Section 402. And Section 402 describes state plans, reports that state governments must file to HHS describing actions. It gets into a bunch of bureaucratese. The welfare reform law became a blank slate. This new Obama dictate asserts that because the work requirements are mentioned as an item that state governments have to report, all the work requirements can be waived. It's not the law. That's just their lawless interpretation of it. And their lawless interpretation removes the core of welfare reform. Welfare reform thus becomes a blank piece of paper, blank slate, that Health and Human Services bureaucrats and liberal state bureaucrats can rewrite at their own will, like Obamacare is. In a December 2001 document, Welfare Reform Waivers and TANF, the nonpartisan CBO, well, a Congressional Research Service actually, clarified that the limited authority to waive state reporting requirements, Section 402, does not grant authority to override work and other major requirements. Now, in the past, state bureaucrats have attempted to define activities, and I'm not making this up, in order to get around the law. This is what liberals have done. In order to get around the welfare reform law, which requires work, liberal straight state bureaucrats have attempted to define activities such as hula dancing, attending Weight Watchers, and bed rest as work. Now, these dodges were blocked by the federal work standards. Now, the Obama administration has abolished those standards. Work can now mean anything but work. And so what happened yesterday, the new welfare dictate issued by the regime clearly guts the law. The administration tramples on the actual legislation passed by Congress and seeks to impose its own policy choices, a pattern that has become all too common in this administration, and the result is the end of welfare reform. It's over. Have you seen it reported anywhere? Have you seen the media even celebrating it? Have you seen any Democrat go on television and talk about, hey, guess what? We have reformed welfare reform, and we've taken the work requirement. Have you seen any story on this at all? You haven't. It's not part of the narrative. The narrative is what's Romney doing with his money. The narrative is when did Romney leave Maine? The narrative is Romney a felon. The narrative is Condoleezza Rice, who's pro-choice, going to be Romney's VP. All the while those diversions are going on, the Barack Obama administration is gutting, at every opportunity they have, the basic foundations and fiber of this country. While they're out there spreading this class warfare and class envy business, that you're poor because he's not. He's only rich because he's taken what you had. And we're going to punish him by raising his taxes, and so you'll feel better. All this class warfare stuff, while all that's going on, Barack Obama gutted welfare reform and basically said, all you have to do is sit on your ass, and we'll now call that work, and you qualify for welfare. That happened yesterday, and we will be back. Don't go away.